Welcome to the Thrive TV Show with Lauren Parsons, helping you boost your health, energy, and productivity.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to another episode of the Thrive TV Show. I'm Lauren Parsons, your host, and today I'm joined by Julia Grace from Auckland, and we're talking about being kind to your mind. So welcome, Julia.
Morena, Lauren, thanks so much for having me.
It's so nice to connect and such an important topic. So today we're going to be talking about why we need better mental health language, why stressed out brains are offline brains, and also how to recognize your wobbly point and why you need to pre-plan your support network. So I'm really excited to talk to Julia, and she's an amazing speaker and singer. But before we get into being kind to your mind, I'd love to just ask you my this and that questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So tell me, spots or stripes?
Oh, spots. Actually, I love both because that's a tricky one, but I'll go spots.
Spots, nice. Beachfront or mountaintop?
Oh, also love both, but definitely the beach.
Okay, nice. Cats or dogs?
Cats, 100%.
Okay, nice. Singing or dancing?
Oh, singing.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it had to be singing, but I think we put both there as well.
But you can't really do one without the other, right? They flow.
Yeah, they do flow, yeah. Chocolate or cake?
Cake.
Okay, nice. Would you rather go for a week without the internet or a week without your car?
Oh, I would happily go for a week without my car if I was somewhere with good internet.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Lovely. So tell you a little bit more about Julia. Julia Grace is an award-winning international keynote speaker, mental wellness educator, and singer-songwriter. She addresses the heavy topic of mental health with a lighter touch, using her personal experience with clinical depression and anxiety to encourage audiences to have better mental health conversations. And I'm so thrilled to talk to you today. So can you start by telling us a little bit about how did you get into what it is you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I've sort of come in from different aspects. Obviously, I've been a school teacher for 30 years. So the education side of what I do has just been growing and growing. The presentation side of what I do has come from my singer-songwriter years of international touring. But the mental health part of what I do is something that's kind of come up probably in about the last 10 years. I spent a lot of time in health education, but my lived experience is actually what really, I think, sets this apart. And about 8 years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference, and they said, come and do a workshop, and what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, I've just been diagnosed with depression, so let's talk about that. So I thought, right, I'm going to get up. I just talk and share from my personal lived experience. And I gave a presentation, and I had 2 doctors and a psychologist come to my event. Now, can you imagine, Lauren?
Yeah,
I'm really glad I didn't know in advance that they were going to be there, because I would have been quite nervous at the time. But at the end, they came up and they said, look, we really appreciated your point of view, your point of difference. And what you're doing is, there's a real space for this, so keep on going. So that kind of got me started. I went away, did a lot of background work, and the 3 threads have really combined together to make what I'm doing today.
So I'd love it. I've never actually heard you share your personal story. And I know, we don't have the whole time perhaps to hear the whole thing, but can you perhaps just give us some insights into what it is that you do share from your story?
Absolutely. So for me, a diagnosis of depression and anxiety was triggered by a big personal crisis. But I'm also really aware that that's not always the case. Sometimes it's the little things that actually just, can climb up too. So we don't want to fall into a trap where we feel like if something huge hasn't gone wrong in our lives, that we have no kind of rights to be dealing with our mental health, because I believe we're all on a spectrum. But for me, I was married for 17 years, and the end of my marriage was very abrupt and unexpected. And that really, I guess, catapulted me in a period of time where I was dealing with some things that I really wasn't prepared for. And heartbreak, grieving, those things are normal, but they began to develop into the point where the bar for my normal mood was getting lower and lower and lower. And so normal heartbreak was starting to get into cycles or spirals of anxiety, and normal low days were starting to feel more and more common. And I'll be honest with you, it's actually been a really humbling experience, because I've dealt with some things that I probably at times have been a bit judgmental about, like panic attacks. And thought that people were being a bit dramatic. And when it happened to me, it's like, wow, okay, this stuff is real.
Yeah.
And I like to say my life is like a long series of getting knocked off my high horse and getting back on progressively smaller horses. And right now I'm saddling up a chihuahua.
Yeah.
I guess dealing with my own mental wellness and then encouraging others to do the same.
Yeah. And I know that you're big on, the words that we use to talk about mental health, mental illness, mental distress, mental fitness. Interested to hear, tell me a bit about, why is language so important?
I think coming from a words point of view, I've always been a writer, I've been a songwriter, I've been a storyteller. And so for me, having words to say in times when I'm feeling really stuck is incredibly powerful. Now, I don't know about you, but I find a lot of people who are confident often we're good at talking about what we think, but it can be more difficult to talk about how we feel. So it's kind of like, does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. But then I'm a big advocate of, this tool you might have heard of, the emotional culture deck, which is all about understanding how you're feeling, how you want to feel, how others are feeling. It's that whole emotional intelligence. And I think denying that we have feelings is just really unhelpful as a leader, as a human being, as a parent, as a friend. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting area, and that whole area of how our emotions affect others and emotional contagion. And yeah, we do need to understand how we feel. And when we acknowledge how we feel, that's just so incredibly helpful, isn't it?
And I think meshing those two together. So often we might be feeling a certain way, but then we don't have the words to say it. And then people ask us, often under pressure, they'll ask us those really hard questions like, how are you?
Yeah.
And we just can end up feeling really blank. So one thing really struck home for me around this topic of mental health language. My dad deals with dementia. So obviously a very, quite a heavy mental health challenge. And he was in his rest home. He'd actually been expelled from a rest home. Okay. And our family, no one's ever been expelled from anything. The first person to get expelled is my dad, and he's really kicking up his heels at 86 and making the most of it, which we think is kind of awesome. But I got a call on the group chat one day. I was at school, and they said, look, we're going to have to move him along again, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is quite heavy stuff. And the message came through, we're sending your dad to the psycho-geriatric ward. And those words just, gosh, they landed hard for me, because it sounded so heavy. It sounds like dad's running around with a knife going, like he's gone absolutely. And it was like, whoa, could we come up with some better words? And, the word depression, it's heavy, it's difficult to talk about. Anxiety is confusing, because anxiousness is normal and it keeps us alive, but anxiety that wakes us up in the night and gets on a path and we can't get off, that's a whole different ball game. And so I sort of thought, what can I say to communicate how I'm feeling without the people listening feeling like they have to be my psychologist or be my counselor? And who's going to come up with some better words? And I realized it was going to be me. So mental health language, that's my thing.
So what are can you give us some examples of some of the better words perhaps? And I know you've got some show and tell. So for those that are listening to the podcast version of this, make sure you head to thrivetvshow.com so you can see Julia and see all the things she's about to show us as well.
And I will tell you as well. So be kind to your mind. That's kind of my tagline, because for me, when our brains aren't doing quite what we want them to do or aren't feeling that way, we can really beat ourselves up. And actually in those moments of feeling like, oh man, why does this always happen to me? What's going on? Just remembering, be kind to your mind is actually a great little mantra or motto. But I have these things called grabbable words. And so they are words that we can grab for when we're under pressure, because of my first grabbable word. So we have a little cycle there. And this one is that stressed out brains are offline brains. I call this SOBOB, Lauren. Stressed out brains are offline brains. And it's a great little reminder that brains under pressure are really bad at problem solving.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Just in that moment. And so that kind of comes back to what we were chatting about before with your language there and those words. Just in that moment where people say, how are you? Or what's wrong? Or is there anything I can do? Our brains literally go into that kind of offline space, and being able to use the term SOBOB or just have a bit of a fun way around that is being able to say, oh, I'm not functioning at the optimum. I'm not going to come up with a great answer for you. I might be feeling quite stressed, maybe aggressive. I might want to run away or feel frozen in the moment, but that is actually okay because SOBOB, stressed out brains, are offline brains. They're great ways to kind of let ourselves off the hook a little bit and other people when they're in those pressure situations.
Yeah, that's so good. I know that my husband would love that and that analogy, because he always says that that a relaxed brain is a smart brain. When he's, in moments when he's perhaps talking to my daughter, for example, if she is getting all worked up over her maths homework, which at the moment is just one of those little regular occurrences in our house. And, we've tried a whole range of different strategies, as you do as a parent. And, my husband has tried to get through to her that when you relax, that just allows you to be able to think clearly. But it can be really hard in that moment. So I think it's good having that knowledge, isn't it, to know that, literally when you have that stress response, that amygdala hijack jumps in and it shuts down the prefrontal cortex, and we literally can't think in those moments when we really need to. We can't think straight. So I like that.
Frustrating. Just when we need it.
Yeah, just when we need it. Exactly. Yeah, well, that's really powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, and you're in the middle of traffic and someone's pulled out in front of you and we start to go into those stress responses, actually going, hey, not only is my stressed out brain a bit offline because of my reaction, but theirs probably is too. And just giving ourselves a little bit of a break.
And having grace for one another. Yeah. What else? Tell me some more.
And right. The next one is actually to recognize your wobbly point. And I love the language. It's one of my favorites. The language of the wobbly point. It's being able to communicate that my body is at a point where if something doesn't change, I'm feeling emotionally wobbly, things are going to start to really either escalate or kind of go downhill from here. And starting to realize that actually in those moments, when we want to communicate, we can use language that's a bit more fun. So it's unlikely for me to flick on my screen to talk to you today, or to walk into the office in the morning, or turn up in the classroom, people to say, oh, how was your weekend? Say, oh, well, a bit of a psychotic break on Saturday, spending a bit of time, some big, heavy words, they're hard. What I love about the wobbly point is it's an easy way of communicating. All I need to do is walk in and say, Lauren, I'm a bit wobbly. And you don't need to know who, what, when, where, how, why, what my mother said when I was 7, what I had for dinner last night. You're not my psychologist. You are not now responsible to counsel me out of the problem. All you're going to do is treat me in a way that's going to be a little bit caring and kind. And I say to people, if you can't even say the W word, you can't even say you're wobbly, just walk into the room like this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a pre-arranged language. It's like a code to say, I'm just a bit wobbly. And I want to get funding for an emoji of a jelly, so that literally people could just flick through a jelly to their friend to just say, I don't know really what's wrong, but something's not right. And I kind of need to just treat myself accordingly.
I think this is really key, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. There are a lot of people listening in who perhaps are listening in not because you have clinical diagnosis of depression, for example, but because I think we all have times when we're languishing. We all have times when life is tough. We all have times when we have to grieve the loss of things. There's been a lot of that over the last 2.5 years. And we all have these moments. And I think that's really beautiful, having that. And it's the sort of prearranged language, as you say, that you could have between your team of colleagues at work, that you can know. And I know there's a lot of really amazing human-centered leaders that are starting their meetings by actually just checking in on how is everyone doing. And imagine if you just had some emojis there and you could actually just point to the wobbly emoji. Yep, I'm a bit of a jelly today. Yeah. How good would that be for you to be able to do that, and for your colleagues to know that they can come and actually support you on those days? Yeah.
And having that fun aspect to it just takes away the sting of feeling like I don't want to say because I'm going to lay the heavy on you. And sometimes we don't even want to ask because it's like, if you tell me, then I'm not equipped to do. But just having that fun language thing, saying it's a little bit wobbly, actually that is totally okay. And you touched on something really great there, Lauren, too, is that it's the pre-planning. It's the knowing in advance. We get insurance for our car, insurance for the house, insurance for the pet, and yet we make no plans for wobbly days, and yet we all have them. It's not just for those with a diagnosis. This is the entire spectrum of human emotion. And so what happens is on the wobbly days, we come out, we're feeling a bit rubbish, and we're highly unlikely, because stressed out brains are offline brains, to go and make a new friendship. And I know many of us have heard the mental health language, if you need help, ask for help. But that's really difficult to do when we are in stress response. So I've got one more little thing here that I just absolutely love, and that is a Jelly Buddy card. So for those listening, it's just a little card with a picture of a jelly buddy. There's a little picture of a jelly on it, and it says on it, check in, hang out, and get help. And the aim of the Jelly Buddy card is to just sit down in advance with someone you can trust and say, will you be my Jelly Buddy? Will you be somebody who, if I feel wobbly, I can let you know? And if I'm wobbly and I can't tell, because that's probably the big challenge with mental health, right? It's inside of our brain. You're allowed to speak into my world. You're allowed to not confront me, but confront me in a loving way. And yes, maybe confront me if need be. Yeah. And I say to people, look, if you're my Jelly Buddy, you can turn up at my house. And if you knock on the door and I don't answer, you're allowed to break a window. And if the cops turn up, just show them your Jelly Buddy card. I cannot confirm completely that this will stand up in a court of law, but I'd love to see it tried. But actually having those people ready up your sleeve. Now, if guys think, I don't want a Jelly Buddy, make it a concrete club. I don't care. Just have somebody in your world that you've had the conversation in advance. On the good days, talk about your wobbly points. My challenge is go home, make a jelly, sit down with your whānau, have jelly for pudding, and talk about wobbly points. How will I know you've reached your wobbly point? What do you want me to do about it?
Yeah.
To help you.
I love that. And I often talk about, when people are wanting to create habit change, the importance of setting up the people around them in their life to actually support them in the right way, because often we do that really poorly. And I think this is quite similar. It's actually being clear up front with someone and having this agreement and understanding and giving them permission, as you say, to potentially actually come and intervene and check in on you out of love for you rather than, what's going on. I really love that, because, if we can do that in advance, as you say, and set that up, it's amazing. It also reminds me of a few years ago, I had a fantastic senior leader in an organization who was really focused on well-being. And he said that he had what he called a dedicated listener. And it was a close friend of his who was actually overseas. And he could phone this person at any time, and he could just share what was going on. He could vent if he needed to. He could, laugh and cry and all those things. And this person would just be a dedicated listener, and they would listen non-judgmentally, and they would also call him out if he wasn't being 100% honest with himself, for example. And they both did that for each other. And it was this fantastic, reciprocal arrangement. So I love the idea of getting that support in place and making that agreement.
And when we're under pressure, we're not going to naturally feel like starting that stuff, right? Because that's quite, that's vulnerable. It's a vulnerable space to say, will you help me? Will you step in? Will you be somebody for me? And you're unlikely to do that on a day when you're already feeling wobbly and a bit vulnerable. So if you've got it up your sleeve, you're like, all the world could be, absolutely out of reach, but that one person, I know I can count on them.
I love that. And it's just such a great practical step. So that's something that I encourage all of our listeners today to do, to decide who can you go and be a jelly buddy for, or a concrete buddy, or whatever you would like to term it. And who might you reach out to, invite them to listen into this and set that agreement up. I love that. Tell me, Julia, do you have people, I imagine you probably have people come up and saying, what are your tips or what are your strategies in terms of picking yourself up on those darker days. I just wonder, do you have anything along those lines that you could share for our listeners?
I have one of my other grabbable words is the 1 degree of change, and just making those really small changes. And I think often people come to my events and they want a quick fix, right? We all want a quick fix, and they want to make a big change, and they go away and they're like, I'm going to go to the gym every day for the rest of my life. Then I say, no, you're not. We don't tend to hold on to big changes. Like you said, habits take time. And I really feel like it's actually the small 1 degrees of change that make a difference. And once again, popping that language in your will, being able to say to your friends, hey, what's your 1 degree of change? And so for me, it's looking for, in the moment, a bit of a keystone habit or decision that may have the opportunity almost to cascade into others. So if I'm feeling tired and kind of strung out and a little bit like physically tired, it's almost backing back and going, what could I do that would actually cause me to be able to do some of the other things as well? So I'll give you an example, going to bed earlier.
Yes.
So that's something. Sometimes we want to take the big thing. We want to make the big choice. I want to do exercise. I want to walk on the beach every day, and I want to join the gym and lift weights. But if we don't go back to the keystone decision, it's going to affect whether or not we have the energy to go ahead and do that. So almost dialing back to something like hydration, sleep, those really simple things, connection, just maybe a little bit of rest and time out. And also just those things of, what do you actually like doing? If nobody else is around, if you've got an hour to sit and watch Netflix, which you want to do, what do you want to watch? Not based on what everybody else wants you to watch. So I think the key for me is actually in those moments going, if nobody else was a part of this decision-making process, what would I do that actually would make me feel, I guess, like autonomy? I've had some choice and some chance. And ironically for me, if left to my own devices for a couple of hours, I have this thing called noodling about. I just noodle about, and I'll go op shopping, and I'll kind of go and maybe just, it's almost like people say, you've got a couple of hours, you've got to go and do something dramatic. And I just want to noodle about. And actually I find just being able to make my own choices, answer to nobody, flick off the phone, just kind of cruise around, I find that quite refreshing and recuperating, so I can come back and get on with all the other things that I need to do.
Oh, that's beautiful. There's 3 key things that I love out of all of those things you just said. One is the importance. I'll start in reverse order. What you just mentioned there about flick off the phone, I think that alone is huge in terms of helping us really look after our mental well-being, actually disconnecting from the online world, from the notifications, from the negative news and the emails, and even from things that can at times be uplifting, but also ultimately we know are not great for our mental health, which is, all the social media, scrolling through other people's highlight reels, how that actually makes us feel worse. So I think that is really key. I also loved that you talked about just finding what you actually want to do. And I think sometimes we're just so busy and caught up in all of the doing, particularly if you are perhaps juggling work responsibilities and family life and all of the things, that very seldom do we actually slow down enough to sometimes do something that's just for us. And I always talk about how taking time for you or taking time for me isn't actually just important, it's essential. And we need to stop putting ourselves, at the bottom of the list. And I think the biggest reason we do end up at the bottom of the list is we feel that's selfish. But I always encourage people to have the mindset flip that actually not doing that is the thing that's selfish. And when we wrap our minds around that, we realize that actually I need to just sit and have this hot cup of tea, or I'm just going to go and pull weeds in my garden, or whatever the thing is, because when I do that, it allows me to show up in a better way. And the third thing that you mentioned that really reminded me of what Michelle Seeger, who's the author of The Joy Choice, and she talks about how in life we sometimes have this pyramid of real needs, not Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but just needs in terms of some of us it's sleep that is the most important thing. Some of us, it is exercise. Some of us it's connection with others. And so figuring out what is your key thing that really is your foundation stone for your well-being, and then committing to that. Like I know for me, all those things are important, but one thing I absolutely prioritize is sleep. And I have to be strategic to do that, because otherwise I'm naturally a night owl and I can stay up. So yeah, I also love Ariana Huffington. She talks about treating getting to bed like catching a train, that it's like you've got this time frame that you're trying to aim for, and it's not just something that just comes and goes and you keep staying up and up and up. You've got to actually be on time, be on the platform to catch that train. So so many good things, Julia. I love it.
Awesome.
So tell me, if people wanted to get in touch with you or find out more about the work that you do, how do they do that?
Yeah, so on my website, so just at juliagrace.co.nz, there's free resources. There's all of those grabbable words there as downloads. And there's also a link to an online course. And on the online course, I've got 8 sessions. They're kind of like a TED Talk type session, just a short video, and then some conversation and discussion questions using some of those stories and fun metaphors, looking at stress triggers and anxiety and loneliness and a lot of the things, disappointment, that we deal with in everyday, particularly adult life. And then also social media channels, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And I'm really hot on the fact that we need to be honest on our social media. So you will get on there some information, obviously, about where I'm speaking and some of those things, but you'll also get information about the 4 times I lost my keys this week, and the fact that I nearly used fly spray to spray into my fry pan to grill the steak. So I'm going to be honest about my own stressed out brain, and because I think that it's great to actually share the real stuff as well as maybe all the fancy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It does. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And it's a really tricky one, isn't it? I always feel this the sense of unease around social media, because I often talk about, limit your social media consumption, and yet I'm on social media as well. And yeah, I do like to jump on every so often and just do some real honest posts, because I think that we all need that, yeah, as well. Fantastic. So thank you so much for your time. I just love the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing your story. It's so powerful, and I love all those grabbable words that you've shared. And so if there's one more thing that you wanted to share with our listeners today, Julia, what would that be?
I would say that learning more about how your brain works is a great way to actually allow yourself some grace, because when we find out what's going on beneath the surface, we can actually take a step back in those moments. So come on board, jump on boards, download, find things, use the information and the resources that are there, because the more you know, the more you understand, and the more you understand, the more you can actually give yourself that time to be kind to your mind.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah. So thank you to everyone that's tuned in. That's been another episode of the Thrive TV show. Go out and thrive.
Thank you for listening to the Thrive TV Show with Lauren Parsons. Visit thrivetvshow.com to access the show notes and discover our fantastic bonus content. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring episode.